Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem faced a line of tough questions from Democrats in a House committee hearing over worldwide threats to our own homeland. Among the topics, immigration, Venezuela, and funding for FEMA and counterterrorism efforts. So at one point, Representative Timothy Kennedy of New York blasted Noem for slashing federal dollars to his state's Homeland Security program fighting terrorism.
Today, Secretary Kristi Noem found herself in front of the House Homeland Security Committee talking about global threats. But to many lawmakers, it felt like she was the real threat as they pressed her for answers on various actions taken by her agency, especially regarding who gets detained and deported. Meanwhile, something pretty shocking was unfolding. 8 members of President Donald Trump's own cabinet have supposedly testified under oath that he's not fit for office. This is the first time we're witnessing such a thing in American history. And it brings us to a critical moment, one where the possibility of invoking the 25th Amendment to remove a sitting president is becoming a reality.
Well, there were various explanations given by the Secretary of Homeland Security for why DHS did cut FEMA grants to New York. In the part of the clip that you just aired, she did seem to imply that these cuts were a result of New York City not doing what the Trump administration would have liked when it came to immigration enforcement.
That's a constitutional threshold that hasn't been crossed since the amendment was put in place back in 1967. Sources indicate that these cabinet officials, which include serious players like Defense Secretary Pete Hegg, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, and Health Secretary RFK Jr., are providing testimony described as pretty damning. They are all individuals handpicked by the president himself, and they are speaking under oath about decisions they believe have strayed into illegal territory.
I'm here to thank you for what you do, the job you do, the way you do it, and I'm here to tell you to keep going.
Rather than to turn them over to ICE, you'd rather release
Secretary Noem,
a murderer out on the street.
You cut $134 million in fines.
One particularly alarming development involves unauthorized military strikes in Venezuela, which they say happened without the necessary briefings to Congress. That's a no-no according to the War Powers Act. In fact, Defense Secretary Hicks mentioned that there was a sense of panic within the Department of Defense as everyone knew those strikes were illegal, yet the president went ahead anyway. This situation is truly a crisis for the administration, possibly reshaping the American presidency forever. So there's this testimony that really highlights how there's been a trend of skipping over the usual processes and ignoring legal rules. And then there's Homeland Security Secretary Kristi N., who's come forward about some really questionable pardon schemes. One case involves the former president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who, by the way, has a conviction for drug trafficking.
Whether it was a political argument, a fiscal argument, or somewhere in between, it was frankly really hard to tell. And Reed, This wasn't the only instance of the secretary and other witnesses speaking at the same time as members of Congress. His hearing got very contentious at various junctures.
There's a man, Jim Brown from Troy, Missouri, a Navy combat veteran who served during the Gulf War, standing next to her during her testimony. It's definitely raising eyebrows among lawmakers who are now looking into whether these pardons were actually being used as bargaining chips to gain political favor. With military actions happening, Congress being bypassed, and executive pardons being tossed around as political maneuvers, these hearings have become quite a spectacle.
Secretary, how many United States military veterans have you deported?
Sir, we have not deported U.S. citizens or military veterans.
I don't believe you served in the military. I haven't either, but I think you and I can agree that as Americans, we owe everything to those who have served our country in uniform.
To make sense of all this, we've got to dive into what the Constitution lays out for removing a president. There are really only 2 main options: impeachment or the 25th Amendment. Most folks have heard of impeachment, but the 25th Amendment is a lot quicker, though it's not exactly straightforward. This amendment was crafted for those extreme situations where a president can't perform their job. Section 4 is often called the nuclear option because it enables the president to be removed against their wishes. The whole thing kicks off in the executive branch, not the legislative one.
Breaking out of the White House, John, this talk of the 25th Amendment apparently getting quite real.
It is, George. I am told that there have been discussions among some members of the Trump cabinet of invoking the 25th Amendment.
It needs a written declaration signed by both the vice president and the majority of the cabinet. Once that's handed over to Congress leaders, the president loses their powers, and the vice president steps in as acting president. It's important to note that the vice president is crucial here. None of this can progress without their signature. But hold on. If the president decides to dispute this declaration, which sources suggest he might, then it heads over to Congress for further action.
I'm also told and aware of conversations among some of the president's allies in Congress. They wouldn't have a role in that, but talking about this as a very real possibility. One ally of the president told me it may not be avoidable, this talk of invoking the 25th Amendment. And it is coming as we are also seeing signs of a revolt among the White House staff.
So here's the deal. When it comes to deciding on the president's fitness for office, Congress has a time frame of 21 days to make a call. If they want to remove him, 2/3 of both the House and the Senate need to agree that he's unfit. That's a much tougher standard than impeachment, which only requires a simple majority in the House. Now, let's dive into the testimony that's brought us to this point. The Secretary of Defense, Pete Hacketh, told the House Oversight Committee something pretty serious. He claimed the president used what he referred to as riot leverage, which basically means he allegedly threatened domestic chaos unless his plans for military strikes in Venezuela received backing. This echoes the pressure seen during that infamous attack on the Capitol on January 6, 2021, when insurrectionists, egged on by the president, stormed the building. It was a frightening scene. Violent crowds breached the Capitol, stole documents, and forced members of Congress to hide in fear for their lives. On that chaotic day, he encouraged his supporters to disrupt the certification of the Electoral College and cling to his claims for a second term. Interestingly, back then, there was even a House resolution calling for the then vice president to activate the 25th Amendment, citing that the president couldn't fulfill his duties, including allowing a peaceful transfer of power. Fast forward to today, and those same arguments are being dusted off thanks to new cabinet testimonies. Then there's Secretary N's testimony, which adds more fuel to the fire. She was grilled by the House Homeland Security Committee about the actions of her agency, including a controversial deportation of military veterans. One case that stood out involved a combat veteran, a Purple Heart recipient from the Gulf War, who was deported to Korea, a place he hadn't seen since he was just 7 years old. Although Secretary N insisted the agency doesn't deport veterans, the man's family was in the hearing room to contest that claim, leading lawmakers to accuse the Department of Homeland Security of actions that are not just questionable, but possibly unconstitutional. And we can't forget RFK Jr.'s testimony, which highlights a troubling trend of the president making big decisions on social media without consulting the necessary departments or adhering to legal protocols. It's a sharp reminder that there are supposed to be safeguards and oversight in how government processes work. So here's the scoop. The process for handling presidential incapacity was put in place for a good reason. It was designed to keep a single person from making snap decisions that could seriously affect policy. When the president bypassed these established channels, it was like he was playing outside the rules. Meanwhile, while the 25th Amendment process is in motion, there's also some serious talk about impeachment happening in the House. House Resolution 353, which has 7 articles of impeachment, accuses him of things like tyranny, obstructing justice, and abusing power. As of mid-December, over 140 members of Congress have given the green light to move these articles forward, showing that there's some real momentum building up. Now, to pass impeachment in the House, they still need a simple majority of 218 votes. But there's a crucial difference between the paths of the 25th Amendment and impeachment. If the president gets removed through the 25th Amendment, he becomes just a regular citizen and can run for office again down the line. But if he's impeached and convicted by the Senate, he faces a lifetime ban from holding federal office ever again. Plus, if a president is impeached and kicked out, they lose a bunch of benefits outlined in the former President's Act, including an annual pension, which was about $219,000 in 2021. Still, even after being removed through impeachment, the former president and their spouse get to keep Secret Service protection for life. Now, let's not forget about the history behind all this. The 25th Amendment came about in 1967, mostly because of issues that popped up after John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Before that, there were times when presidents got really sick or injured, and the vice president didn't take over, which created a bit of chaos. Take President James Garfield, for instance. He lingered for 79 days after being shot back in 1881 without the vice president stepping in. Or look at President Woodrow Wilson, who had a stroke in 1919 that left him partially paralyzed, but kept that under wraps from the public. And President Eisenhower had his own health troubles, which led him to make some informal arrangements with Vice President Nixon for temporary power transfers. The sources mentioned that while the 25th Amendment is meant for those situations of physical or mental incapacity, its wording is pretty vague. It talks about a president being unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, which has left legal scholars debating for years about how it could apply if a president doesn't seem fit for the job. Things are getting pretty serious with the president messing up so badly that folks are starting to question whether he can still do his job. Right now, Democrats in Congress are stepping up, arguing that the president's illegal military actions and skipping over Congress show he's not fit to serve. The political fallout from this is huge, especially since midterm polls are already showing the Republican Party dropping 12 points nationwide. There's some unrest brewing right within the president's own party. Senator Josh Hawley and his group are calling for the president to resign, particularly over the situation in Venezuela and those pardon deals that raised eyebrows. Hawley is digging in his heels, using every trick in the book to block the president's plans and claiming that he's lost the trust of the administration itself. This puts Vice President J.D. Vance in a tight spot. If he decides to invoke the 25th Amendment, he'll step into the role of acting president, which would make him incredibly powerful overnight. But it also puts him in the crosshairs with the president's loyal supporters, who would see him as a traitor. If he stays silent and the president keeps making these questionable calls, Vance would have to face the music for any scandals that follow. He's currently weighing whether to go through with a process that's never been used to remove a president against their will in American history. The president, as expected, is reacting in a combative way. On social media, he's branded his cabinet's actions as treason and a coup, accusing Democrats of playing politics with the 25th Amendment. But it's hard to label it a coup when those raising the concerns are the president's own appointees, his supposed loyal allies. It's not just random politicians speaking out. These are the people he chose, and the evidence isn't just what we're hearing publicly. There are reports about emails that have been subpoenaed as part of the investigation into classified documents, indicating cabinet members have been discussing the president's behavior behind closed doors. These emails allegedly imply that the cabinet thinks the president is obstructing justice, hiding critical information, and making choices that could jeopardize national security. When you combine this private conversation with the public outcry, the case for declaring him unfit seems to get stronger. The president is really up against it right now, not just with the threat of impeachment and the potential activation of the 25th Amendment, but with a slew of other legal hurdles, too. Federal prosecutors have some serious evidence pointing to a tax fraud scheme. Plus, there's this huge investigation into offshore billions and shell companies that hide income. On top of that, state prosecutors in New York and Georgia are also going after him with their own charges. You can really feel the pressure mounting, and sources are saying this could be the final nail in the coffin for a presidency that's already under immense strain. His playbook has revolved around delaying, denying, and deflecting. He's been trying to push these legal battles off until after the next election, calling evidence fake news and shifting blame to his political opponents. But this strategy hinges on having unwavering support from his base and a united party. Considering how Republicans in Congress are looking at disastrous poll numbers and cabinet members are testifying under oath, that unity seems to be cracking. If the 25th Amendment gets invoked, everything kicks off right away. Congress would need to determine if the president is fit to serve. For 21 days, he would lose all power, essentially being put on pause, while the vice president steps in as acting president. Even if he manages to survive a vote in Congress, the damage would be done. His own cabinet would have deemed him unfit, and his party would have seriously entertained the idea of ousting him. Then there's Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which has come into play in various states as a way to challenge his eligibility for the ballot. Now, while the Supreme Court decided in March 2024 that states can't disqualify a presidential candidate under Section 3 without congressional input, the argument about whether the events of the 6th of January amounted to an insurrection just won't go away. Sources have pointed out that the House Select Committee referred him for prosecution on multiple counts, including one for insurrection. The tension in Washington is thick, and we're witnessing a real-time test of our constitutional limits. It's a chaotic and unprecedented scene. Reports indicate the president is making questionable military decisions alone, while his cabinet members are in a state of panic behind closed doors. And then there's the vice president caught in a tough spot between loyalty and the drastic action of invoking the 25th Amendment. Meanwhile, Congress is still pressing forward with impeachment efforts. As we look ahead to the midterm elections, it's worth recalling the thoughts shared by some people in the Capitol during that chaotic attack back in 2021. Representative Jaime Rasheen, who knows a thing or two about the Constitution, pointed out that the president isn't upholding his oath to protect it. He argued that the president didn't take the necessary steps to defend the republic from that domestic unrest and violent insurrection. Now, lawmakers are echoing that sentiment, arguing that with the president's current actions, like those unauthorized military strikes and ignoring legal processes, they believe he's become incapable of doing his job. The next few days and weeks are crucial for what's coming next. We're on the lookout to see if Vice President Vance will put his name on a declaration and if more cabinet members will come forward to share their thoughts. Plus, we're keeping an eye on the polls to see how the American public feels about this administration's ability to govern. Sources are saying that if the 25th Amendment is invoked to remove the president, that could change the game for how future cabinets might hold a president accountable when they think he's stepping outside legal boundaries. This situation has moved beyond simple policy disagreements or political rivalry. The sources are clear that we're talking about serious legal and constitutional responsibilities. When people like Pete Hegseth and Christie N. give their testimony, it's not about if they're fans of the president's goals. It's about whether they think he's breaking the law to reach them. And when the Secretary of Defense says military strikes were ordered against the War Powers Act, that's not just someone's opinion. It's a legal issue. Now, the Republican Party finds itself at a crossroads. They can choose to remove the president now and risk upsetting his loyal supporters, or they can stick with him and potentially face a huge defeat during the midterms. Some Republicans are starting to think that getting rid of him may be the only way to secure their future in the party. This divide is being fueled by conservative leaders who still back the president's policies, but feel he's become too much of a liability to represent the movement. In the House of Representatives, the debate is just as intense. Back during the January 2021 hearings, some Republicans claimed that using the 25th Amendment would be a terrible misuse of power, insisting it wasn't meant as a political weapon. They contended it should only apply to situations of physical or mental incapacity, like a major illness or serious injury. So right now we're seeing a lot of chatter in Congress where defenders of the president are insisting that Democrats are misusing the 25th Amendment for their own political gain. But there's a solid counterpoint brought up by Representative Rasheen, who makes it clear that incapacity isn't the same as disability. Take Franklin Roosevelt, for instance. He had physical challenges, but still led the country effectively. Incapacity, on the other hand, means someone can't behave in accordance with the law or the Constitution. This situation is causing lawmakers to really focus on that difference. They argue that if a president disregards the War Powers Act and goes around the cabinet, then they're effectively incapacitated. in a constitutional democracy. Sources also shine a light on the personal impact of everything happening, touching on a recent hearing where a veteran's family shared the human cost of current deportation policies. Lawmakers recalled the trauma from the January 2021 attack and the lingering fear that similar violence might happen again. It seems like there's this exhausting cycle of crisis leaving the halls of power feeling weary as the country grapples with division and uncertainty. And as we wrap this up, there's still that big question hanging in the air about what's next. If the vice president and 8 cabinet members decide to sign the declaration tonight, just like that, the president loses all power. If they hesitate, the impeachment process will just keep trudging along in the House. Regardless of the outcome, Donald Trump's presidency is facing its toughest trial yet. The 25th Amendment was thoughtfully created so that the United States always has an active leader, especially during those dark times when a leader just can't lead. Whether what's happening now qualifies for that is turning into a pretty intense constitutional debate. The testimonies are there, the legal documents are all set, and the stakes couldn't be any higher. Think of the 25th Amendment like a safety valve on a high-pressure engine. It's not meant to be used frequently, and its activation signals that something serious is off with the system. But when the pressure rises and other controls fail, it's the only option to prevent a potential explosion. Now, we're left wondering if those responsible for our democracy will finally decide to pull that lever. I've been taking a good look at the wild situation happening in Washington right now, and it seems we're at a real turning point. The talk about invoking the 25th Amendment is back on the table, and it's not just chatter. There's a serious vibe of political upheaval. It's honestly hard to believe he said that out loud. Historical documents from 2021 remind us that this isn't the first time we've heard discussions about the 25th Amendment in relation to this president. However, hearing 8 cabinet members willing to step up and testify about illegal activities makes it feel like things are escalating more than ever before. With House Resolution 353 making its way forward and the looming presence of the 25th Amendment, the future of the American presidency feels like it's teetering on a tight rope. The signs suggest we're witnessing an unprecedented stress test for American democracy. I can't help but be curious about whether the system safeguards will hold up under this kind of pressure. The details surrounding testimonies, the deportation issues, and even the admissions from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. have given us enough substance to understand the growing alarm. We're no longer just talking about political opinions. We have 8 high-ranking officials openly questioning the president's fitness for the role. It's clear this situation goes beyond typical party lines and has turned into a real crisis for the executive branch. Now, the difference between impeachment and invoking the 25th Amendment is significant, both in procedure and outcome. Impeachment is a long, drawn-out legislative process, while the 25th Amendment allows for a quicker shift in leadership. Interestingly, both routes are being explored simultaneously. As I wrap up this reflection, it's essential to remember what the 25th Amendment was actually meant for. It's all about preserving the integrity of the office and ensuring the government keeps running smoothly. How it's applied now, whether as an essential protective measure or a political tool, really lies in the hands of the cabinet and Congress in the days ahead. There are already signs that the political aftermath is affecting the Republican Party in the polls. The fracture within the party, especially with folks like Josh Hawley, shows that even some of the president's previous supporters aren't on board as strongly as they once were. Moving forward is certainly going to be tricky for everyone involved. For Vice President Vance, it feels like a choice between becoming an acting president or navigating the storm without a clear path ahead. The cabinet is in a tough spot right now, caught between wanting to stay loyal to the president and sticking to their oath of office. It's a dilemma not just for them, but for the whole country, navigating a crisis that's unlike anything we've seen before. Sources reveal that this president pushed things too far, ignoring the very people he chose to help him run the government. Ironically, those same individuals now hold the power to get him out of office. The 25th Amendment, which once seemed like a mere footnote in our constitutional history, has suddenly taken center stage as the most significant law in the country. I'll keep you updated as this situation unfolds. The hearings are still ongoing.